in English language textbooks in Japan. And you may have seen this before we started, but there is a pre-event survey. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill it in if you haven't done so already. Okay, so before we begin, I'd just like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, in today's webinar, we will be using Q&A. So please add your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. It will make it much easier for us to see and respond to your questions. We'll be monitoring the Q&A and the chat throughout today's session. And there will be 10 minutes allocated to Q&A at the end of today's webinar. The speakers will answer selected questions from the Q&A box. In today's webinar, microphones and cameras will be off. We will be recording the webinar, and we will share a link, including a QR code, at the end of this event. This will lead you to the place where the webinar recording will be uploaded. A little bit of background information. The British Council supports efforts to increase awareness of inclusion and gender equality in English language education around the world. In 2022-23, we commissioned a study which looked at the representation of gender roles in 4 lower secondary textbooks in Japan. And this research looked at textbooks published since the introduction of the revised course of study in 2020. The research was conducted by Transform ELT, and we're pleased to be able to support the sharing of their insights and recommendations with you today. We have 2 speakers, Donna Tutski and Ginny Rowlands, and you would have been able to see some more information about them on the page before you came here. Okay, so it's time to begin. The first speaker will be Donna. So Donna, would you be able to begin? Hi.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And so just give me a moment to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, I believe I've got this on slideshow, so hopefully we can get started. Okay, thank you very much. So this presentation is going to share the research and, oops, I don't know why it's doing that. It's not supposed to be going without me saying. Okay. So the research results and recommendations from gender roles in English language textbooks in Japan. So let's first look at, okay, let's look at some of the issues in past research that formed the basis for this study. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, were ratified in 2015. They're understood to be a shared humanity. And among the 17 components of the SDGs, the 5th goal is to achieve gender equality and empowerment for all women and girls. However, as of 2022, the United Nations has reported that the world is not on track to achieve equality by 2030. School-based education plays a large role in the intellectual development of young people in every country, especially the primary and secondary levels. Textbooks have a strong influence in learning. According to recent research, between 70 to 95% of classroom time is spent using textbooks. However, even in recent UNESCO-funded research, it has been found that textbooks around the world continue to show patterns of gender bias. Stereotypes may limit a student's belief in their own abilities. It may limit their goals and their dreams for the future. So in this study, we asked the following questions. Question 1. How are gender and ethnicity portrayed visually and verbally in a selection of Japanese junior high school level English language learning textbooks? And question 2, how balanced are the representations? Research question 3 will ask, what does the intersection of gender and other social variables such as ethnicity, age, or disability reveal? We added this question because much previous international research has overlooked its intersections with class, race, ethnicity, and sexuality. Studies can become more complex and rich by taking into these interlocking systems of power into consideration. Okay. The first year volume in each of 4 popular English language learning textbook series was selected for this research. It's important to note that any biases or stereotypes found through the research of these materials are understood to be unconscious or unintended by the content creators. So first, let's look at visibility as expressed by images and naming. So when examining gender balance, visibility is one of the most straightforward measures available. Visibility is important because when females do not appear as often as males, the implicit message is that women's accomplishments, or that they themselves as human beings, are not important enough to be included. Recent research has found women to be often less visible than men. According to a 2020 Global Education Monitoring Report published by UNESCO, females appeared in 24% of the text and images in secondary school English language textbooks published in Pakistan, while a 2022 GEM report found that 57% of the characters in Australian textbooks were male. In this study, each instance of a human image on each page was counted and categorized by gender and ethnicity. For the most part, junior high school textbooks consistently present and represent male and female genders with conventional gender signs or indications like clothing or haircuts. Ethnicity was determined through character names, characters' descriptions such as explicit statements like Meg is from New Zealand, or hair color. According to the most recent census data, the population of Japan is 49% male and 51% female. So if textbooks are meant to reflect in some way the reality of student lives, it would be reasonable to expect equal or slightly higher numbers of females compared with males to appear in textbooks. So there's good news on visibility. Female images outnumber male images in 3 of the 4 textbooks under investigation. Taking into consideration the current population balance, the 3 textbooks with slightly higher proportion of female images can be said to closely resemble current reality. By introducing the variable of ethnicity, it's possible to see how many of each gender are Japanese and how many are non-Japanese. Since these textbooks are written for Japanese learners, it's a positive outcome to see images of Japanese characters outnumbering those of non-Japanese characters. However, Japanese males outnumber Japanese females in 3 of the 4 textbooks, although the average, on average, it is slight. Gender-based differences in naming and namelessness have been identified in other research and is considered to be problematic. With the exception of 1 textbook, females with names slightly outnumbered males with names. However, when intersected with ethnicity, female non-Japanese characters with names outnumbered female Japanese characters with names in every textbook. This means non-Japanese female named characters had higher visibility than their Japanese female counterparts. On the other hand, male Japanese characters with names maintain their visibility. They are outnumbered only once by male non-Japanese characters with names. Now, each textbook has its own unique story to tell and cast of named characters. This could account for some of the variability in visibility and naming patterns. For instance, all the textbooks have a female ALT, a language teacher who is not Japanese, as a main character. So this may explain to some extent the higher number of non-Japanese females with names. Next, we'll focus on gendered images and stereotypes. Nearly 5 decades ago, textbook research revealed that biases in which women are often less visible than men, often the butt of many jokes, and often were placed in stereotypical roles and assigned stereotypical emotions. So what stereotypes are being referred to? Well, females are sometimes labeled as weaker, less active, more passive, more emotional when compared with males. In some societies, certain occupations, sports, and hobbies are considered suitable for females, but not for males, and vice versa. In our study, each textbook was examined page by page, seeking images of characters engaged in occupations, sports, leisure contexts, and household duties. The combined totals of the 4 textbooks indicate that males are more visibly engaged in all 4 categories. Seeing males take on more household duties might be based on past recommendation to increase male participation in the home. If this is the case, it shows that research into gendered images in textbooks that produce concrete recommendations can have a positive effect. However, seeing males in the majority in all these areas plays into the stereotype of males being more active than females. Females dominated individual sports like skiing, skating, running, and tennis. Males outnumber females in team sports, baseball, basketball, soccer, and rugby. In leisure contexts, it was a positive development to see males and females involved in the performing arts in similar numbers. However, the stereotype of males watching TV and gaming was compounded at a rate of nearly 10-to-1 compared with females. And most instances of dog walking was done by a female character. Was this another stereotype, or was it just a coincidence? We don't know. Females are seen in fewer occupations than males overall. The occupation teacher accounts for the highest frequency in all textbooks. And this makes good sense because most of the scenes are in school, in a school environment, and the learners are being introduced to the teachers in those stories. Male teachers outnumber female teachers overall in these textbooks, but that accurately reflects the Japanese job census data for the junior high school level. However, when ethnicity is considered, most of the female teachers in the textbooks are non-Japanese assistant language teachers. When Japanese female students do not see themselves represented in the images, they may have less inclination to see such an occupation as a possible future for themselves. The occupations in the textbook also compared the gender distributions to Japanese census data. It is positive to see females depicted in some jobs that are male-dominated, according to the census data. And these are jobs like police officer or pilot. However, across the textbooks, females are seen doing fewer jobs than males, even in careers that are considered stereotypically neutral. On the other hand, females exceeded males at a rate of more than 2-to-1 in jobs considered female-dominated, such as receptionist or nurse, according to the census data. There is an argument here for promoting images of women in non-stereotypical roles because seeing is believing. Seeing Japanese female characters in a wider range of roles may encourage Japanese female students to believe in the possibility of attaining that goal. However, it's not as simple as simply equalizing numbers by placing just any female characters in male-dominated professions. For example, the female doctor images in the text were all non-Japanese females. If Japanese female students do not see themselves represented in the images, they may have less optimism about pursuing such an occupation for themselves. Male heroes and notable people clearly outnumber those of females in all except one textbook. Non-Japanese males included Albert Einstein, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, Charlie Chaplin. Female Japanese notable people are restricted to sports, including Osaka Naomi, Hirano Miu, Amimoto Mari, who's the wheelchair basketball athlete. Meanwhile, Japanese male notable people are seen in sports and literature, including Natsume Soseki and Otani Shohei and Chokai Renshi. Balancing gender could be achieved by including some historically notable women in science and literature too. Next, we'll look at language and dialogues. This part of the study used dialogues and model sentences. Research has found that how much is said and who starts the conversation are among several indicators of dominance in interaction. The amount said is a superficial measure of power. Who starts the conversation is far more important to examine. The speaker who starts the conversation often controls the setting of the topic and possibly is in a stronger position to control the direction of the interaction, set the tone, set the pace, and thus control the interaction as a whole. This imbalance may have consequences since a male-dominated text might suggest that boys have a right to be verbally dominant in the classroom, and further, that girls should say less in classrooms compared to boys. When only gender was considered, female speakers spoke slightly more than males in all textbooks, though on average, the balance is almost even. In the case of dialogue speakers tagged as neutral, this represented practice model dialogues in which the roles are marked speaker A, speaker B with no accompanying image. However, when ethnicity and gender are considered together, the picture is more complex. On average, female Japanese characters speak fewer words than all the other characters. Female non-Japanese characters speak a disproportionately high amount in 3 out of 4 textbooks, with male Japanese characters speaking the most in 1 textbook. So who starts the conversations? Well, when we averaged all the textbooks, the gender-neutral practice model dialogues initiated the most conversations, followed by female non-Japanese characters and male Japanese characters. On average, female Japanese characters initiated conversations the least. Besides how much is said and who starts the conversation, it's important to consider who speaks with whom, since dialogues in the textbooks provide models for practice in classroom lessons. The mixed gender conversations were the most frequent, whereas same gender interactions, no matter whether they were male to female or female-female or male to male, were the least frequent. And again, large numbers of interactions with no designated gender in the form of practice model interactions for oral practice. This was seen as a positive characteristic since it assures practice opportunities to all students. The use of gendered language was one of the earliest criticisms in the history of textbook analysis, and it has figured strongly in recommendations to publishers for the past 4 decades. In recent years, there have been moves to replace masculine nouns with gender-neutral forms. So instead of policeman, now we have police officer. Instead of mankind, we have humankind. There were no instances of gendered language found in these textbooks, and this is really great news. Furthermore, the status-neutral address forms Mr. and Ms., as well as the gender-neutral Japanese form sensei to denote teacher, regardless of gender or ethnicity, were consistently used. And so again, this is good news. An analysis of firstness, the order of words like boys and girls, ken and keiko, he or she, indicated a good gender balance in all 4 textbooks. Results like these are a positive sign that recommendations can work. Seeking equality benefits everyone. So what can teachers do? And so with that question in mind, I'd like to turn over the floor to Ginny, and she's going to tell you a bit about that. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now so that we can continue and look at how, the role of teachers in this process. Sorry. So, the teacher, all of you who are watching today, have a role in addressing the kinds of issues that were found in the research into Japanese books. So today we'll look at examples of gender bias in learning materials. These can vary across images and text. Strategies for achieving gender balance, where neither the males or females are dominant, and resources that you can use for bringing gender conversations with your students into the English language learning classroom. So to start off with, we're going to look into a primary classroom in the UK. And while you're watching, I'm going to ask you to think about 4 questions. These are the 4 questions. The children are asked to think about some jobs that adults do, and they are asked to draw their impressions of those jobs. These children are around 6 years old. I'd like you to look at what they draw and think about whether children in Japan would draw the same pictures as these children did. I'd like you to think about why children were surprised. And I'd also like you to think about whether this lesson in the primary classroom might change the children's attitudes to gender. So I'm going to start the video now. So it would be a good idea if you could take a last look at the questions and even perhaps take a screenshot or a photograph of them so that you can remember them.
This afternoon, we're going to draw people doing different jobs. And the first job we're going to draw is a firefighter.
Have a think in your head what a firefighter looks like.
What's your firefighter called?
Mine's called Firefighter Gary.
Firefighter Stan. Firefighter Simon.
He's big and strong.
He's got a big helmet on.
That's brilliant, isn't it?
Next, we're going to draw a surgeon.
Have you thought of a name for your surgeon?
Jim Bob.
Jim Bob.
He's a brain surgeon. I think he would wear a stethoscope.
He gives you medicine.
That's his ambulance.
Okay, next, we're going to draw a fighter pilot.
This is his jet plane.
He rescues people.
He likes to do stunts in the air and stuff.
Okay, now who would like to meet these people for real?
Faye, when you want the dressed up.
My name's Tamsin and I'm a surgeon in the NHS.
My name's Lauren and I'm a pilot in the Royal Air Force.
My name's Lucy. I'm a firefighter in the London Fire Brigade.
So, I'm going to ask you some questions now. Can you use the chat if you're ready with your answers to write some answers? So can you write in the chat the 3 jobs that the children were asked to draw? Can you remember them? There were 3 jobs. So if you can remember, can you write it in the chat? Great. That's right. Firefighter, jet pilot, and surgeon. Brilliant. Do you think children, thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, I think let's go on to the next question. Do you think children in Japan would draw the same pictures as the children in the UK? Do you think anyone in Japan would draw a female surgeon or a female fighter pilot or a female firefighter? A lot of you think it's very similar in Japan. That's interesting. So why were the children surprised? Were they surprised because they were expecting a man or men in those 3 jobs? They expected men. Yes, I think so too. Great. So a lesson. Thank you so much for your participation. We're going to move on now. Expecting men, exactly. So a lesson like the one we just viewed can help children to think about the fixed ideas that they may already have, even though they are only 6 or 7 years old. These are stereotypes that already exist in their minds. Thank you for your participation. We're going to have a look at some key concepts now. We're going to think about gender bias. This was mentioned in the research results. We're going to think about gender representation, how both females and males are portrayed or shown in textbooks or learning materials. Gender balance, which is what we should be aiming for, where neither gender is dominant. And finally, gender equality, which relates to what we would hope for society, as well as in education. So these are the definitions. Can you read the definitions of those different concepts and think about which one goes with which key concept? So, gender bias defines one gender, is where one gender appears to be stronger or more successful than the other gender. So that's called bias. Gender representation. Gender equality is where males and females have the same opportunities without discrimination. Gender representation is how males and females are represented and described in the images and texts. And gender balance is what we would be aiming for, where males and females are seen in about the same numbers in relation to the research that this webinar is based on. So Donna described how visibility is a way of checking gender balance. And we can do that by using various questions. We can look at our books or our learning materials and ask, are there more girls in the images than boys, and vice versa? Do males have more central roles than girls in text? For example, is a text focused on a male celebrity rather than a female one? Do boys actually say more than girls in dialogues that we use? And are girls even omitted from images and text, not seen and not considered? We can also look at gendered images and stereotyping. And again, these are some questions that you can use to help yourself, to help evaluate and assess whether there is any gender bias. Are boys and men described as dominant physically? And conversely, are girls and women shown as quiet and shy? Are females portrayed in restricted occupations, maybe even stereotypical occupations and activities? And do female and male portrayals reflect society? Donna showed us some information from the census, which can help us to balance and give us an objective for gender balance. And finally, another area that we can look at is gendered discourse. Of course, when we are teaching a language, the discourse is very important, and how that's represented should also show gender balance. So do females and males communicate in dialogues equally? How much is said and the way that the conversation is constructed? Do males dominate certain language functions, for example, questions or requests? Do females appear dependent on males in dialogues, just like a support to the males' steering of the conversation? And are there examples of gendered language? For example, using the word fireman and not firefighter, which can be representative of either gender. So what can teachers do to improve, or at least understand, first of all, understand and then take steps to gender balance? Well, the first step is to be able to notice any issues that are in the images and texts that you use. That's something that we're going to look at today. Following that, you can investigate what those issues exactly are to understand the problem. Is it a visibility issue? Is it stereotyping? Or is it gendered discourse? Then you can start critiquing and challenging the materials if you think that they represent females and males unfairly. And after that, you can make a decision about what you're going to do with those problematic materials. There are a few options. You can use them as they are, and even as a springboard to talking about gender without changing them, but focusing on where you can see the issues and the bias. You can adapt them so that they are not as gender biased as the original, and again, use that to perhaps draw attention to the issues. Or if you find them too gender biased, you might want to find a substitute or create a substitute that has no gender representation issues. To help you with this, we have developed a framework of questions to use, and they form a strategic framework. Within that framework, there are 5 strategies working towards a solution. We're calling it the access strategies. The first strategy is to assess, to notice and assess. Moving into critiquing, challenging if you see an issue, aiming to equalize or possibly substitute on the route to solving the issues. So let's have a look at some of those questions and which part of the process, which strategy they relate to. So the first question, does the text use any expressions that suggest superiority of one gender over the other? That would be, the superiority would be an example of gender misrepresentation or gender bias. In that case, we might want to challenge the materials and possibly change them or even find some different materials. What I'd like you to do now is take a few seconds to read the other 5 questions on the screen and think about which of the strategies they connect to. I'll just give you a moment to think about the other 5 questions. They relate to one of the strategies that you can see at the top. Okay, shall we check together? So can you produce alternative texts or dialogues? This would be if you think that you don't want to use the material and you want to substitute something else. Is there a gender angle? Would be at the beginning of the process where you are checking the materials for any bias. An example might be a unit on occupations, and you might want to check that the representations are fair and equal. Do males speak more than female characters? That would be part of your critiquing strategy. You are checking to see whether it seems balanced or not. You can remember that Donna told us that in the textbooks that she evaluated, males nearly always, in the majority of the dialogues, started the conversations. When boys and girls gain mutual respect for each other, I think we can say that we have solved the problem or found a solution, so that the materials have given us the chance to talk about gender and focus on gender and make children and give children the chance to rethink perhaps some of their initial ideas. Finally, if females are given more empowered roles, then we are on the road to equalizing those materials. And it could also lead to an opportunity to talk about gender equality with your learners. That might be something that is new to the classroom, but it can be a rich area for discussion, even with primary children, as we saw in the video. So on the screen now, you can see a lot of questions. I'm not going to ask you to read them, but these form the complete framework around the 5 stages working towards a solution where we would hope that boys and girls are equally represented and ideas about representation are also balanced. This access framework will be available to you very soon via the British Council's Teaching English website as part of a toolkit which will develop some of the ideas that we are looking at today for bringing gender into the classroom. So look out for that very soon. We're going to move on now to some examples of materials that we might use in the classroom and how we can apply the access framework. So here's a very typical image that we might find in a textbook to illustrate a reading text about video gaming. So I'm going to give you a little bit of thinking time now. I want you to think about the image, what's in it, and whether you think there are any gender issues portrayed in this photograph. So what can you see, and are there any gender issues connected to this photograph? All right, so let's check it together. Remember, in the framework, we said, is there a gender angle? Now, the gender angle here is that often playing video games is thought of as a male occupation. In fact, it's stereotypically assigned to males. And this
2 minutes.
Thank you. And this was something that Donna found. We can say that there's a visibility and stereotyping issues. Leaving females out of the picture, even though 47% of gamers in Europe are girls or women, is rather unfair, I think. So we might want to equalize this through discussion. Learners investigating gaming in their classrooms and beyond, and presenting the results to others. Hopefully, in the end, girls are empowered and boys can include girls in gaming conversations. Let's have a look at applying the access framework now to a typical short dialogue from a language learning book. So 2 characters, Tom and Sue, they're talking about their weekend. Tom asks, and Tom wants Sue to talk about her weekend, but when she talks about it, he calls her a couch potato. I think he thinks she's lazy. So what about this? Shall we apply the access framework to that? Is there a gender angle? Are there any gender issues? Are females and males represented in a balanced way? Can it be adapted? Can we find a more gender balanced conversation? Here is a more gender balanced conversation that I have adapted. Have a look at it. What makes it more gender balanced? Well, it starts with a question instead of tell me about your weekend, which doesn't sound so friendly. Sue gives her answer and Tom is really enthusiastic. Then Sue has the chance to answer and they find common ground. It turns out they both had a relaxed weekend. So the second adapted dialogue has been improved from a gender perspective. Neither Sue nor Tom dominates conversation. They speak more or less equal amounts. Tom starts with a question, not a command. Tom's reaction to Susan's news is enthusiastic. Sue has the chance to ask Tom about his weekend. And finally, they find common ground. It seems more equal and friendly. So these are the kind of things that you can look for and use this framework to assess and understand whether the materials are gender friendly or not. I'm going to show you now some materials that you can use that have been developed by the British Council. This is a lesson that's designed for primary learners and is a version of the lesson we saw in the video. Instead of asking the children to draw a firefighter and a fighter pilot, they are given some words, some phrases about 3 jobs, and they are asked to draw them. So somebody who catches criminals, somebody who helps a doctor, and they, using those definitions, they draw a picture. Then it goes through the same process, and the pictures that are revealed are of women being a policeman and a surgeon, and the stereotype is challenged. This is another lesson that's been developed by the British Council around the theme of heroes. We know that there is underrepresentation of female heroes, and there should be a gender balanced representation.
Sorry, Ginny, would we be able to move on to questions?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So just going to show you that when we publish this PowerPoint, you'll be able to see lots of links to gender focused materials for the classroom. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Ginny. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Q&A now. We have a few questions, so I'm going to read some of them aloud for Ginny and Donna to answer. Our first question comes from Haruka, and she asks if you have any data about which Japanese students are considered to be good at English in the textbooks, girls or boys?
Oh, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, that didn't necessarily come up. One example, though, that I can think of is there was only one example of someone who, a student who felt too shy and had to be encouraged to speak, and that was a Japanese female student. And the teacher had to, say, "Oh, be brave, you can do it." Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Ross. He's wondering if you could clarify the difference between assess and critique.
That will be for me then. I think assess is your first impression. I use the phrase gender angle. So you can see from your first reading or first flick through your unit that there is perhaps going to be some possibility or opportunity to focus on gender. As I mentioned, talking about occupations, talking about leisure activities, the kind of things that actually Donna looked into in the textbook are kind of ripe for assessment. Also looking at how many texts are texts about notable people or famous people. If you think that that the text could be more balanced, could have an opposite, if it's a male, maybe you could introduce a female text. I think that's at the beginning of the assess of the strategies where you're assessing. Then you would need to look in more detail and investigate and critique what are the issues? Is it about stereotyping? Is it about the number of words that are spoken by the girl or the boy or the male or the female? And are there some issues with gendered language as well? I hope that answers it. So it's a gradual process that one would hope that you would get used to and just add it to your teacher toolbox, really.
Thank you. The next question, do you know if the main authors of the textbooks are male or female, and would that affect the representations of gender?
We did a preliminary look at the textbook committees. And one of the, I have to qualify this because, we only had the list of names. And so, of course, sometimes names can be used by either gender, but we did the best we could in trying to, assess male or female. We found that in 3 out of 4 textbooks, the majority of the people on the textbook committees were male, 75% were male, 25% female. There was only one textbook that had 63% female and 35% male, and that was a real surprise. And so again, I think that probably, the committees are starting to evolve and change and become sensitive to these issues. But again, it was just preliminary look, and we didn't have a chance to make direct connections between the effects of having these different, proportions.
Thank you. As a final question, do you know if there's been any research about high school English textbooks along the same lines?
Okay, there is quite a lot of research at all different levels on Japanese textbooks, although I don't know if anything is particularly recent. So among the things that I've been looking at, many of the newly published things are on the previous 4 years of textbooks, the ones that were published in 2016 or 17, and then, were no longer used as of 2020. Yeah. So that's not a bad thing because, some of the issues, are perpetuated because, people stay on the committees and, some of the topics get recycled and so on. But it's an ongoing process and there's still a lot of room for more research in this area.
Can I come in there as well? I think that one of the areas for research also would be researching books that are used for younger children, because as we saw in the video, even children at 6 or 7 years old have some basis for believing in stereotypes at such an early age. Most of the research seems to have been done into secondary age or high school age books for learning English. So I think it would be interesting in the future for research to consider primary age books as well.
Also, I think that there's lots of room to look beyond language textbooks. It would be good to look at the, math textbooks and other areas as well to see how they're managing.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've come to the end of the Q&A section. Unfortunately, we couldn't answer all of your questions, but thank you very much for the answers that we did get from Ginny and Donna. And thank you very much for your webinar today. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
We hope you're going to enjoy the toolkit once it's published, because
Yes.
some of the ideas that I raised, you'll see in a lot more details, and I think you'll be able to understand how to use the strategies more.
And likewise, please enjoy the final report because there's a lot more detail in that as well.
Yes. So on that note, there will be a report and a toolkit published in the coming month, and they will be available if you follow the QR codes on the screen. We will also make a recording of this session available to you following the same link. And before you finish, we would really appreciate it if you could fill in the post-event survey. And there's a QR code here and also a link to follow to the survey. Thank you very much to everybody for coming, and thank you very much again to Donna and Ginny.
Thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.